hadalkii aan u jeediyo himilo toosan lahayn iyo hadaag waa ku dilay hawraari waa murteedinay hadaani waa gabaygeena ama heesta cayaarta ama hawsha middeeda heelo iyo buraanbur hooriskeeda iyo jabka higada iyo luqda hasaawiyo ammaanta hanjaabadiyo faanka xalxidaalyo sheeko waa hiraab iyo toosan waa afkii hidaheena amase hooyo iyo aabe hantidii ummadeena habiistii ubadkeena waa hogaan dhaqameedka marna aan la hurayn lagu soo hiraanyo
Imagine almost 500,000 innocent men, women and children condemned to live in the middle of the desert. Imagine the place where they live. Sand and dry bushes dominate the landscape. There is no sea and no mountains. Riverbeds are mostly dry and the sky rarely produces rain. This place is called Dadaab, the largest refugee camp on earth.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Dadaab.
Base 92.
I arrived a week ago, and my impressions are more or less the same ones as when I was here in 2007. Camps are obviously overcrowded, this time yet even more overcrowded, and there's a lack of services throughout because of the huge population. All the refugees have a hard time just surviving, continuing their lives.
People, refugees, escaped the war and insecurity, famine and hopelessness. They left their homeland because they were scared, because they couldn't bear putting lives of their children at risk.
When we are Somalia, we were not going outside from the house because Al-Shabaab come home. They can do anything they want.
There was one time when we were in our house, then they started some shooting guns, and some people were just screaming.
Or just like watching on the mirror, you see. What was it called? This one. We are just like watching people running away, killing each other. So my parents came here with us. My family and I came here.
Where they came from, life has been unbearable, unrelenting, dangerous and cheap. Fighting and famine brought once proud Somalia to its knees. Lately, there has been lack of everything: of food, hospital beds, consumer goods, but above all, hope. Many parents have been saying that they left because of concern for their children. They simply desired better life for their sons and daughters, better education, better childhood, and better life. Many people lost their loved ones back in Somalia or in other country where they came from. Families crossed the border to Kenya, some illegally, braving danger, extortion, and violence. Some died on the way to the camp, others lost everything. Those who arrived were often sick, dehydrated, starving. But at least they made it. They thought, now our children would be able to live in peace, to obtain knowledge, to have a chance in life. But the reality is brutally unlike the dream. Dadaab is now synonymous to indefinite waiting, to misery and frustration, to shattered dreams. Once refugees arrive here, they get registered, fed and housed in simple dwellings and tents. Then they are told to wait. Some are already waiting for 2 decades.
My first impression was it was huge. It was an enormous place, and even the question came up to me is that how one really managed this place because of this influx of refugees coming on a daily basis, as well as those who are already there, and also the kind of a situation in which the harsh environment, very hot, dry place with very basic access to facilities and things like that. So already it's a huge, enormous critical challenge for human existence. On top of it, of this crisis of refugees coming on a daily basis, that really struck me. And also the way the camp was laid out, it was quite cramped and very little space for people to move around, and because it's of its demanding nature of the setting, the environment, and everything. So that really kind of hit on me as on my first visit. Another thing also is diversity, because although majority are refugees from Somalia, but also you find smaller percentage of other refugees from other parts of Africa, like Rwanda, Uganda.
What we saw was quite shocking, although what we had been hearing was shocking enough. And from the point of view of education as a human right, you can see right away that apart from the fact that they are not receiving enough basic services, either from the point of view of shelter and food and nutrition and others, you can see right away that their livelihood and the right to education is not necessarily being respected. And this is the part of the population around the world, refugees around the world, who tend to be forgotten because they're caught in the crossfire in the political situation, whether it's their fault or not, doesn't matter. Women and children and around the world, and also their brothers and sisters, and elderly or not, they're caught in the crossfire of a political and geopolitical the wars and conflicts, and they find themselves in a situation where they don't know what to do with their life, whether they're going back or they're being resettled or not.
I think what you can say about Dadaab is that it has been a protracted emergency for 20 years with very little attention to it, very little funding. And this situation has been something that the local partners here, our education partners and the UNHCR has been struggling to patch for the last 20 years. The last year we had an influx of 160,000 new arrivals, and that's only from January of. So it's not slowing down, it's increasing. and it's putting a very heavy strain on the existing services that we're providing. We see it specifically in education, since it has been and is traditionally a field that is underfunded and not very much prioritized.
In Eastern Africa, more than 12 million people have been affected by the drought, including people in Somalia, of course. And the two southern areas of Somalia, the UN has declared that those two areas was in status of famine. So people every day, more than 1,200 people have been coming to Dadaab because of the impact of drought.
There's a lot of operation on providing humanitarian efforts was going on one side, but certain questions, when you go deeper into certain specific issues, then one has to rethink the whole approach towards what is it one can do, realistically, what is it one can really make a difference in a life of a refugee. When I noticed that there's been refugees who are born in the camp and growing up in the camp, really not knowing the world outside, and there are refugees who are still coming in. So half of their growing experience happened in Somalia, and the rest is continuing here. And again, no one knows whether they're going to go back or going to be here.
It is widely accepted that education is a fundamental right and is the main vehicle for the creation of a just, cohesive society. But this very basic right has long been denied to vulnerable, marginalized people around the world, including those caught in the middle of a protracted conflict such as the one that is ravaging Somalia.
We came into contact with the operations of UNHCR and their implementing partners, and we thought as a technical agency, and from a point of view of not only education as a basic right, and also the principle that we have been supporting governments to promote, which is education for all. We thought that we should join forces together with other agencies and also in support of UNHCR, and together with a host government is something we can do so that we can promote education from a holistic point of view, and not only looking at the schooling environment, but also from a skills development, and looking at the adults, looking at the youth who have been there for many years and most likely to be there for many years to come. And there's a very little prospect of going back to Somalia or being resettled anywhere. And the UNHCR data clearly showed that there's a decreasing chances of resettlement or repatriation. So education as a means for livelihood, education as a means for self-fulfillment, and also possibly creating opportunities to make to improving their situation and taking their livelihood into their own hands, if possible at all. And they have to have knowledge, they have to have a value, they have to have an attitude they need to cope with that environment, and hopefully they find a better situation in the future for their own life.
Nearly 500,000 Somalis and other Africans are now in the world's largest refugee camp, Dadaab. They find themselves with very little prospect of reintegration or resettlement. While some education provision has been made inside refugee camps, it has not been made to all school-age children or to youth and adults who require basic education, including literacy skills. There is no denial that Dadaab refugees are facing problems such as the access to education. There is a lack of resources, facilities and teachers. Education for girls is inadequate, and so is parental and community commitment. Traditional notion and cultural practices prevented girls and women to exploit potentials of education and skills developments as means for livelihood. Process of teaching and learning is flawed. There is lack of qualified, competent teachers and textbooks in the language of instruction. There are shortfalls in relevant curriculum and culturally responsive learning environment. There are very few teachers who can or are allowed to teach in Somali language and in Somali cultural context. Scope of education is limited to formal school-based education. Literacy and non-formal education for youth and adults is mostly neglected. And those who manage to go to school, after 8 years of basic learning, what comes next? Where do children go for further schooling and knowledge? There is hardly any continuity of education on offer.
waxaan ku soo qaxnay rafaad iyo dib ilmaha gacmaha ayaan ka soo qabsanay waan kala dhunnay waxba dad baan soo aruuriyey aniga dhabarkayga laba canug baan ku keenay xaan imaada birta dheer waa laga soo qaabilay ifaa lay keenay
aniga magaceeda Safiya Macalin Isaaq aan lahaa waxaan imaaday 97kii marka dib la yaab la ayaan ku soo qaxay ilma caruur waxaan lahaay afar cunug mid markaasaan dhalay 3 bilood ayuu dhalnaa ma aragtay midna dushaan soo saaray midna habadkan ku soo qaaday midna qoorteeda 3 caruur ayaan soo qaaday 3 habeen baan rafaadkaas iyo silcaas aan ku soo socday markaas ka dambe ayaa ilaahay gaarigiisa la saaray aan ku imaaday dhulkii
marka noloshaan waxaa iska bedelay hay'adda la qaabishay waana la dejiyay hooy baan la siiyay raashin baan la siiyay nabadgelyo ayaan helay ka fiicantii aan ku joogo Soomaali dagaalo sokeeyay aan istagaalay laba dadka walaalaha labada qolo yaa istagaalaysa dhawalaale hantidii waa la dhacay haddii ahayd magaalo iyo haddii ahayd duur ragga ugu islaayay bilcaan waxay haaleen sirsaasta ku dhacday caruur sidoo oo kale marka intee ku dhow darisnimo ama nabad Kenya hello carrada dhibkaasana soo qaxiyay.
Can you ask the other lady if she remembers any particularly shocking event, maybe somebody being killed, somebody shot on the street?
aniga guri ayaa 8 saac la igu soo dhacay markii 8 saac la igu soo dhacay ilma agoomo oo walaashay dhashay ayaa ila joogay ninkii aniga qabay iyo caruurta iyada ahayd oo 3 ka mid ah hortayda habad loogu dhuftay ninkii aniga qabay markaas iyo caruur 3 ah oo walaashay dhashay agoon iyo rajayba marka naxdintaasi to aan adduunkana aan ku iloobay ma inaan dhinto aan ma aragtay carrada hoos aan ka marmo saacada waa la igu furtay dhagaha waa la iga siitay wixii ay yaalay waa la iga qaatay aniga qoriga baadkiis ayaa la ila dhacay al'aankan infection buu ugu noqday xanuunkaas ayaa waan qabaa
waa lagu laayay dimaashiga oo 3 nin ah iyo 2 canug gacanta nafteeda aan ka jamaa lagu jibo gacanta nafteeda lagu jibo aan ka jamaa idii laga qaracay hadda nafteeda ayada waxay leedahay infection aan kula hadlayo marka qaar raxmada kulaata hata ay u dhibinaan socdo waxaan qabtay inaad wax ka mark
arrintaas ayaan ugu qasabtay ma ogiyo waan jeclaan inaan joogo
dhulka ilaa 20 beri dhul dhac darto ugu soo jiraan waxaan soo aday harjida soo dhaco waxaan imaaday dobley birteeda dheer ayada yaa noogu imaatay waa naga soo qaabishay gawaari aan ugu soo qaaday waana la keenay qoraalka dhinaciisa kadibna dib aan loo soo celiyo laga soo dejiyay si fiican ay Kenya ay hay'adda noo qaabileen wax dib oo nagu dhacay ama naxdin oo naloo geystay jiray
ilaaha mahadle markaan inta imaanay dhulkii iyo dhibaatadiina haysay waa ka qabowsanay marka aniga markaan soo galay berta dheer markaan imaaday si toos ah ayaa migrationka dawladda aan u sugiyay naflahaar baan bahay adoo dawlad aragta ayaan lahaa markaan u tagay dawladdii weji wanaagsan ayaa igu soo dhaweysay gaari aan isoo saaray waxaan ku dagay gaariga isaga ahay ma aragtay Dadaab.
But is Dadaab home now? Because this is after all a refugee camp. Or do they feel that this became their home?
Dadaab haa dadka dhulkaan joogo gurigaana waana ka bax lama dhaho waxba noolama dhimo lama dilo lama ayno wixii dadiyaba yaroo hadii iska dhaco bini'aadanimada ku dhaco wax ahaan culaasan ma laha
fikradayda markaan u arko Dadaab gurigeena uma arko sababtoo Dadaab dad baa deganaa horteen wadan uu dad deganaa ayay ahayd annaga waxaan ahayn dad soo barakacay oonaan ku lahayn meesha ma aragtay oo sabar looga ayaa la siin jiray wadanka markii aad deganeed guriga aad leedahay ama beerta aad leedahay ma aha Dadaab annaga haddaan gaarno sharci ma lihin hadda ka baandho ma lihin gaarisa hadda ma gaari karno markaan socono baska aan raacan waana laga dejin meesha inta socotaana la leeyahay hayadaas madaxeed un baan ku joognaa annaga muugiyo oo ma arko aniga fikradayda Dadaab inay wadan annaga aan leenahay ay tahay qofka bani'aadamka 20 sano hadda hayad baa meel lagu haysay haddii aan 20kaas sano dad madax bannaan oo meel wadamo kale gaarisa ugu dhow aan tagi karo ama Bambaaso hayada waxay siinaysaa waan ka maarmi lahaa
wax isu dhow waayo waxa arkaysa cunug galaadka sideedaad baa imtixaan fursan oo qori karin magaciisa sideedaad buu galayaan waxaana cross garay macalinka u dhigaayo oo istaadiyay ma aha macallin eedkiisa ku adag wax lagu soo baro asagoo qaxootiga qaxay wax la baray marka waxa loo sii daayaanay malaha adeeg oo macnaha hay'ad ay controleyso ilmaha waa maxay cunugi dhaca oo waan ku dhaca magaalada lixaad ama toddobaad eber ku tagay celin gadaal loo celin oo alla dhii cunuga u dhacay ay isku imaan malaha waalidiin oo sasan oo masaxdeeda malaasay oo baqaysa ayaa waalid u ah war ilmaha way daataan dad wax ka hoos qaad male oo kula qaban oo macnaha dhaar daryeel loo sameeyo qaxootiga ما ilmaha luqada garaan ilaa galaaska lixaad ka hor galaaska lixaad lagu gaarsiin jiray kuweyga lagu gaarsiiyay Somali wala afka hooyo loo soo dhigay galaaska lixaad iyo weeka marka dad Somali kuma laga Somali baan nahay oo ma haysan luqadka oo ku cilcilinayna kaanaga inkastoo hadda kuwa Korean secondary oo kayr geesina la ka bareemaysa oo ma
waxay yihiin carruurta harada Dadaab ku nool kuwa lagu maaweeliyo waxbarashada ma haystaan waxbarasho oo ku filan sababtoo ay macallimiin oo ma aragtay oo tababaran ama training soo martay ama college soo bogtay ma aha macallimiinta loo keenay kuwa ayaga nimanka eedka ku dhacay ayaa masala form 1 soo u joogay la keenay baa loo dhigay ma bartaan afka Swahili iyo Ingiriiska waqtigu ay bartaan ma dhawoobay
When I went to Dadaab last year, I had a chance to observe a literacy class, and it was conducted in a primary school, and it was catering for young generation, well, I would say a youth from the ages of about 18, 19 towards 50, 60, mainly for men. And a very few number of women. But I came across a situation as we left the literacy class, we had an opportunity to observe only 5-10 minutes, and nothing much was going on. They didn't have textbooks, they didn't have a trained teacher, but they were there because they want to do something to improve their livelihood. It's not about where do I go next, it's about living now, it's about living tomorrow, and hoping perhaps that like women, if they have a better skills, they can support children going through the same. And not only schooling, but also skills development path through training and education opportunities, however little they may be in the camp setting, like in Dadaab.
So what we are looking at now is, in the camps we have a population of about 60% children and youth, and that makes for about 250,000. And we have an enrollment of about 60,000. So that's a large number out of school. And also this has to do with access to education, quality of education. It has to do with also future opportunities. Why do you take an education if you do not, if it doesn't serve you in the future? We have for the time being 22 primary schools. We have 6 secondary schools to cater for that population. The enrollment in primary school is 42% as of last year. It may have been going down to something like 34% now after the last influx. And in secondary school, we had a 2% enrollment in the last calculation. So it's quite low. The challenges are so many. We lack the learning spaces, we lack desks, we lack textbooks, we lack trained teachers. And this all affects the children's learning. The desk ratio is 6 children per 1 desk, and now probably even more. The classroom ratio is 100 children in each classroom.
The shortage of teachers is not in terms of training. It is in terms of capacity for the government to pay additional teachers. It's the budget constraint. Actually, when you look out, there are so many graduate teachers who have been trained, but due to budget constraints, they cannot be absorbed. So if we can get more finances from UNHCR or from whatever partners, we are able to get more teachers who have been trained and have not been absorbed even by the Kenyan government. The government is very, very concerned about the refugee education, considering the fact that education has no boundary. Every child has a right to education. And therefore, that is why I'm here, to be their eye and ears on what is happening here. However, we are expecting that more officers will be brought on board so that we are able to maintain the quality and maintain the learning that goes on here.
way ku weyntahay Safiya Xasan Nuur hadda lacag aan dadkan oo u gala ayaan ka bixiyaa saacad inay u baasto darteed meel kale oo maanta midaan daari ragma ayaan geeyay saacad u baasto darteed marka murugo yaab leeyahay aniga dareenkayga hadiya iga muuqato maskaxdayda
hadaan weynado waxaan rajeynayaa
magac ka bilow
waxaa la Sitaxali Xuseen Xali hadaan weynado waxaan rajeynayaa inaan maxal noqdo
Mira Xasan Nuur galaaska waxaan dhigtaa 7 waxaan rajeynayaa intaan dadka
Have any of them been out of camp?
weliga xeradan ma ka tagto meel kale ma aaday
So camp is, they only have been in Dadaab camp. They never even went to any other camps.
weligan xerada qaxootiga la joogteen miya meel kale weligan ma aaday
Do they dream about the world? Do they imagine the world?
adduunka waxa kala socotaan ma jirtaan adduunka macnaha waxa kala socotaan waxyaalaha si u kala socdaan waxa garanaysa ma jirtaan cabsan
But they like to go and visit other cities in Europe, in India, in Asia, in...
ma laga yaabaa inaad booqataan Europe India inaad booqataan ma laga yaabaa qaaradda oo Asia hataa inaad booqataan ma laga yaabaa If we have opportunity from UNHCR we will travel with it.
So UNHCR is a bridge to everything.
marka UN idinka wax walba idin qabato miyaa macnaha idin dhexaadis idin samayso
saan tagna xiriirkaas UN baan ka sugaynaa laakiin anaga hadda rajigaas ma nagu jiro
we do not have a near future of going out the same all comes from UNHCR all hopes come from UNHCR
Of course, those children who ended up in Nairobi or other Kenyan cities are in much better position. They're attending classes in both state and private schools, they have opportunity to continue their studies either in Kenya or abroad. Several neighborhoods in Nairobi are inhabited by Somali minority. One of the neighborhoods is called Eastleigh. Unlike in camps, Somali people here are enjoying permanent residency status. Some even manage to obtain or to purchase Kenyan citizenship. The situation in education in Kenya is far from perfect, but incomparably better than in the camps.
So you add the line which has all numbers.
You know, they are born into war, especially those who come from Somalia. Okay, the children who are born in Somalia are born into war. And as early as, let me say 4, they are able even to handle guns. And there's a boy who told me last year, "Teacher, what are you telling me about discipline? You want me to be disciplined here? When Kenyan children were going to school, we were busy shooting people around as early as 5 years." The boy has a nickname called Giza. Giza in Kiswahili means darkness. And I had another one called Osama. These two boys, those are nicknames, Giza and Osama. These two boys were just impossible. But by the end of the day, by the time they were leaving class 8, they were my friends. Because I made them know, okay, you know, they are the kind of boys that you try to hold, you know, the way we do when you're very annoyed. You will hold the boy maybe by the shirt. He will hold you back. Yeah. You lift a hand to slap, he lifts his. Because that's the way they've been trained. Okay? You hit me, I hit you. Yeah. It is instinct. They're not doing it like they're being rude. That's the way they were trained in their country. So we have had to tell them, here we do things differently.
Well, you love them. It seems you love them, these children.
I sure do. I sure do. By the way, I never used to like them until I came to this school. But when I came to this school, I found they are very innocent. They are very understanding. And especially the Somali girls. You sit a girl down who has made a mistake and you say, you know, I don't want this. And the girl will give you the side of the story. Teacher, you know, I thought it was like this. And we say, no, it is not like that. I say, now teacher, now I understand. And because I've understood you, I'll never do that again. And they're very good girls. The facilities. As you can see, the school is dilapidated. Like the windows, the government provides and we thank them. But the resources are never enough. Like now, if you check the lower classes here, all the windows are broken. And you know, we are moving into the cold season.
Many of these children came from the war zone, basically, because there is a war going on in Somalia. Do you have some mechanism to determine if they have some psychological trauma after what they experienced in Somalia?
Some do. We really don't have a mechanism that is preset for them, but the teachers are trained in counseling. And we have like 3 teachers now who are pursuing counseling at a degree level. One problem I have with Somali children, they are really closed. You'll have to be a very, very good friend to make a child to open up. In fact, they are close to the extent that you'll find 2 children fighting, seriously. But when you get to that, no, teacher, there's nothing. It's nothing serious, we'll handle it. But we have learned to, you get them away from each other, then each one will talk. Yeah, but they have that problem. And then I also think what they went through has put some careless attitude in them. It is like life really doesn't have a meaning. So they go through school as though doing it for somebody.
Bismi means his name. His name is Allah. Ar-Rahman. Why do we start with this? Why do we start with this? Because there is the remembrance of Allah. There is the remembrance of Allah.
I just have a passion for these children. You know, I came here in 2009, second term. And when I didn't know what to expect. Because personally, I knew I had been brought to Pangani, and it is a public school, like any other public school, and I'll have the normal children to teach. But when I came here, I found a totally different scenario. And since then, I've had a passion for these people. And also, given my faith, I'm a Christian, it says the best religion is taking care of the alien. You take care of the alien, and God blesses you for that. And my vision is that once this child is taught, miraculously the child will go back and shape Somalia. We want Somalia back on its feet. Because when it is trouble, we are. And mostly we don't get to the topic of Somalia. Because once they come in, we want to assimilate them, but we don't want to discriminate. We want to treat them as Kenyan children, okay? We don't treat them in a way to make them feel like now they are different, no. What we do to the children, we do it uniformly. So in fact, we rarely talk about Somalia unless when we get to the mandate and other issues where the country comes in.
اتقوا الله حيثما كنت وأتبع السيئات حسنات.
Most of our children, they are the spill-off from the Kakuma refugee camp. And once in a while, they have to make it back to Kakuma for the head count from the UNHCR. So every other holiday, the children must travel all the way from here to Kitale, to Lodwa, up to Kakuma. Now the Kakuma, we are okay, let me say our school is also privileged to have a teacher. One of our support teachers here, who is only a volunteer in our school, used to teach in Kakuma refugee camp. The camp is enormous. The camp is just more than we can be able to define. And life is very hard within the camp. What I've learned from the children is that they have a lot of tribute to pay to the teachers there, because they are taught, including the night. A lot of very good work is done in Kakuma by the teachers there. The children we have here are able to communicate to some extent in English, to some extent, with the basic communication skills.
Are children who are coming from Dadaab or from Kakuma traumatized after the conditions they had to live in these camps?
Yes, seriously traumatized. Last year we held situations where children in this school, all what they knew is war. And we had to contain that discipline side of it, because you find that they have that kind of trauma. And even now in school, it now extends to the classroom environment, where they would start wars in classes, fights that are sometimes spill off to the rest of the community, who now come in support of their own.
How can people live? How can they survive for 20 years being detained in the middle of the desert? What does it do to their psyche, their creativity, their identity, and their self-esteem? How can they stand that insecurity, not knowing whether they would ever be allowed to walk through those gates and enjoy a white world that begins behind the barbed wire. Imagine you were born in prison, and prison is all you know. You were not sentenced, and you don't know when you would be able to be free, if at all. And what is freedom? Going back to your war-torn country? Being able to move on to the Kenyan capital? Or receiving asylum in some third country? To complicate things further, Kenyan troops entered Somali territory on October 16, 2011.
waa subax bacayn salkeeduna muxuu ahaan maxaa berri laga sugaa salkeeduna muxuu ahaan maxaa berri laga sugaa haddii nabaadii la sayray colaadii markay siyaaday dadkii sabab li'ii la laayay markay salkaceen dhammaan allaan tala saarane wixii aadmi uu ku siiyo gaajada ka mas-uuliyaan allow colaadu suusho allow nabadu ay saldhigato magaca soomaaliyeed sidii u beri ahaa
My name is Abdullahi Mohammed. I'm a member of a participatory video project facilitated by Filmate International in Dadaab, Kenya. I came from Somalia, and particularly Chupa, Lower Chupa, in a town called Kismayo, which is a seaport. And when I was in Somalia, I lived with my parents. We were a nuclear family. And when the war started, the war has drastically affected all my family at large. So that's where my father, my mother, and two of my siblings were killed, and during the war, the civil war in Somalia. So, and when I was coming here, I was evacuated with my neighbors. They were also very caring and good neighbors. And I and my two younger sisters, who were also my siblings. So when we have come here, we have come to a refugee camp in 1992. But in 1991, we first arrived in a Liboye, Kenya, and refugee camp, which is a Somali-Kenya border refugee. So it was dismantled in 1994. And you know, the security issue in the camp was very bad during those days. So, and what happened in the camp was, and in 1997, one of my sisters, when she was 14 years old, she fell prey to the bandits, and she was really raped. And after 2 years, she died as a result of the rape complication in 2000, in the year 2000. We are really a group of just a student, and this is more or less like a tertiary education in the camp. And normally we are trained on the skills of filmmaking, and which categorizes into the aspect of story writing and the treatment, and also the technique of script writing, and the production, which is mainly pacing on the camera. So when it comes to the production, that is where we learn now the different techniques and types of shots, camera shots. And at the end of it all, we learn the post-production, which entails the editing aspect in filmmaking. So normally, and what we do is we normally write stories that are affecting the refugee community in Dadaab. And the stories can comprise stories that are affecting or impacting the refugee community in negative ways, or those that are impacting in the positive ways also. And so when you see the kind of production we have made here in the camp, you will find most of the stories are issues that are negatively affecting or impacting the communities. And such as resettlement, which is something that is negatively affecting the community. So you will find many families all have lost a lot of hope in the resettlement when they've not succeed to get their resettlement to outside countries like America or Europe. Maybe many families, have failed in the process, and most of them even has run and a lot of trauma, experienced stress or trauma in the camp.
This came to me when I was working today with your filmmakers, with the young filmmakers from Dadaab. We were trying to answer what is really Dadaab. It's not anymore a refugee camp. It's for many, it's the country. It's the place of identity for young intellectuals, and there is a growing, still small group of Somali intellectuals. This is the only place they know, and that's the place about which they make films, write poetry, and so what is Dadaab really? What is it becoming? Is it permanent entity, or is it something temporary? If temporary, for how many years, you think?
Time will tell, but you know, we have very little options here. The refugees here have very few options. Either you have a stable Somalia in maybe the next 10, 20 years. If you don't have that, maybe the question will be whether or not these people can integrate into the Kenyan society. So these are the two, options you may have, or the in-between existence that we're seeing now. But of course, I mean, it's not a durable solution.
And that brings me to the question that I was asking you earlier. The goal, at least according to some experts, is to make sure that Somali refugees can return back to Somalia once the situation, or if the situation in Somalia improves. If they do not have sufficient knowledge of their own language or education in their own language, is it realistic to expect from them that they could integrate into Somali society once they return?
I think it's a very good question. I just asked the same question. No, I don't think that's realistic. And if the future becomes the way we want it to be, and this generation can return and build up a better Somalia, then of course we will have had an impact on their cultural and linguistical abilities. So it's a good question, and it may be something that we need to revisit when we look into the strategy and when we look into what kind of curriculums we're using in the camp. It is absolutely but it's also a political question. It's a sensitive question. So, but it's a valid one.
What was your impression of Dadaab? You visited Dadaab as well.
Camps is always the same. I mean, because I look at the social conditions that people are living under. And I mean, it's appalling. There isn't anything like a good refugee camp. And that's not because of the physical conditions necessarily. It has to do with the kind of social relations that develop in the camp. First of all, there's the top-down giving of aid, the treating of refugees as though they're animals, not people, the way food is distributed, the humiliating arrangements they have for distribution of food, the lack of education. I mean, you can go on and on.
Utterance without weight, spoken with no emphasis, and all frivolous speech is the death of our language. Our speech is our heritage, the most intricate poetry, a song to make us dance and a song to help us work. It's helo and burambur, it's chorus and refrain, syllables and music, conversation and veneration, threats and boasts, riddles and tales, stories and facts. Our speech is our heritage, spoken by our ancestors. It's the wealth of our people, our children's treasure house. It's the lodestone of our culture, utterly indispensable, the means of seeking assistance.
And here, refugees are making energy-saving stoves out of clays and cowdan and a metal jacket. they make about 1,000 stoves a month. So this factory has 19 staffs, and then there's another factory in Ifocam, they have 14 staffs. And they make stoves, and they also do the educations to the other refugees about energy saving stoves, and they do monitoring also. So here, my staffs are making bricks. The brick is made of the red soil, cow dung, and black soil. They mix it with water. And the soils are locally available, and they mix it with water, and they make 250 bricks a day. So, how are you? So they are the interns, huh? Three. When did they arrive? When?
Goormay 5 months ago.
Hi. How are you? My name is Yoko.
Magacayga Yoko la
You are relatives?
qaraabada miya waan xaafadda leh all same block
You in the same block, but from Somalia? Where are you from in Somalia?
Somalia askale mate ha
Did you lose your family members in the war?
qoyskiino ka dhumay ma jira a lot
Who did you lose?
ya ka dhumay ilmaha aan wato toddoba cunug waay now I have 7 children
7 children now.
aabahood hooyadood their father and their mother they gone away.
You are taking care of the children who lost parents,
yeah,
huh?
lost parents. Yeah.
Your husband? Your husband?
Ninkaadina ninkayga waa soo dhintay dhaxda ku soo
He died also. Husband.
You're talking about huge number of children and young people who don't know anything other than Dadaab. That's where they always live. That's where they might be living for the rest of their life. You don't know in the current context of the situation. So although education as understood, commonly understood as like schooling, they may not have many opportunities to go on beyond even secondary school because of the constraints that exist within the camps, and particularly in the situation with a host government. I think there's a lot education, if understood in a broader sense, can do to facilitate their daily living, and hoping that they might be able to find some kind of hope and expectation, and also opportunities to improve their own livelihoods, no matter how constrained the situation or no matter how difficult their living context may be.
Education is, unlike the other kind of development inputs, is a kind of a long-term kind of an investment. If you're going to take that as a stand, then the kind of education, or I would say even the basic skills that a person need, if it can be viewed as a long-term thing, both their life here and maybe when they go back, what is it they need to be able to survive. But often people have a very limited vision when they talk about education, because education, people think it's only for getting jobs. But education is not only about getting jobs, it's also about how one copes with their social, economic life and political situations. So we are talking about the necessary life skills, the necessary skills, what we call within the field of literacy, and then those skills, how those skills can be used to gain more knowledge, gain more access to information, and that can help my overall life, including my own social life.
naf nool oo ka dhargeysa horta ma laha hooyadiisii qofka nin kastaba hooyadiisii ayuu soo dhamaraa uu jecel yahay wadankaas wadan aan ka dhargeyna maaha waa hooyadeena dhashay
halkeed wuxuu yahay laakiin mid ka mid waa ku riyoona waan u rabi tuugna inay dhismato oo wadan noqoto sideeda cal looga babaso.
We provide the basic services that a government would have provided, but we do not provide much more than that. We're overstretched. We're in an emergency, and we're coping, but you know it's hard. So I would say that we may lay the foundations for this community that you're talking about, but we are not. Whatever happens after the foundation is laid, that's part of a living community, that it grows on its own and without much of our involvement.
Living in a refugee camp amounts to a violation of Article 3 of the European Convention. The court ruled that it was a breach of Article 3 to send Somalis back to Somalia or to Dadaab refugee camp, and that means that it was cruel and inhuman and degrading punishment. And the case goes on about the conditions inside the camps in Dadaab.
What is particularly so bad about the Dadaab camp compared to other refugee camps?
Well, I don't think there is anything so bad about Dadaab compared with other refugee camps. I think if you went to refugee camps almost anywhere, you would find the same kinds of conditions that people are suffering.
When it comes to defining education, or the definition of education here in the context or in the setting of this refugee camp, and it entails very many and different things. And it can mean education in a form of skills, and to some people, there are some people who have acquired some skills here in the camp, and then they're applying the skills to sustain their living.
I think education is very important, and it's the only key factor that can bring solution to this refugee problem.
And then attitude is how everybody treats others and how he treats himself. So once you are educated, then you will not be violent. You will always like things to be peaceful. You will like always to be a negotiator. Whereas that if you are not educated, you don't have knowledge, have no skills, then you can't help others, you can't help yourself, you can't help anybody.
Yeah, to me, I can say to me, education is the backbone of the life of our lives.
If I define education is something that can give me knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and can make me to live holistic life in life, wholesome life that I can share ideas with others and live with others wherever they are, and whatever nationality, whatever color they are, something that can make me to live with others.
What is ahead for people of Dadaab? What will be the developments in 1 year, and what happens in a decade? Future is uncertain, but what is obvious is that the only sure way forward is through education. It is a slow way, one has to move forward step by step, but obtaining knowledge never fails to bring positive results. Through learning, refugees could acquire life skills. They could boost their own confidence, bargaining power, and ability to speak to the world about their plight. Education and knowledge can also improve their quality of life and the way they interact with each other. If educated, And armed with knowledge, once people are free to leave Dadaab, they would be able to start new lives in their native lands or abroad. For now, the future appears to be bleak. World community remembers refugees only during the famine and wars. But in the past and present, international community has deeply impacted development in the Horn of Africa. It should be up to it now to promptly find solutions and to improve the fate of almost 500,000 people whose lives have been until now put on hold indefinitely.